behind the towering minarets, fragrant gardens, and glistening palaces of the Ottoman Empire, there existed a hidden world, a world not recorded in official chronicles, yet very real, a world where young boys were brought into the imperial court, not as servants or soldiers, but as companions, carefully chosen and trained. These boys weren't slaves. They weren't prisoners. They were selected for their grace, talent, and beauty, and raised within the palace itself, not just to serve, but to accompany, to delight, and to reflect the status and sophistication of the empire's elite. Contrary to modern assumptions, this practice wasn't secretive or shameful. In the Ottoman court, these young companions were visible symbols of wealth, refinement, and power. This isn't a forgotten footnote in history. It's a story of desire, control, cultural contradiction, and an emotional undercurrent that defied the laws of empire. When people today think of harems, they imagine secluded women and powerful sultans. But the reality was far more complex. Across ancient civilizations, from Persia to Greece, from China to the Ottoman world, male companions also held a place in elite circles. In Ottoman society, the presence of these boys was not seen as deviant. It was refined, normalized, even admired. But admiration did not equal safety. For every silk robe, there was a cage. For every gentle smile, a silence, a risk. Consider the haunting tale of Tahir and Tib, two young Ottoman men taken by Christian nobles during a time of war, and yet, instead of torment, came affection. Their captors, moved by the boys' charm and spirit, treated them not as spoils of war, but as companions, adored, protected. It seemed, for a fleeting moment, that love could overcome politics, that tenderness might triumph over empire, but the world was not ready for such a truth. Their love, though genuine, was condemned by both Christian and Muslim authorities. What followed was imprisonment, public disgrace, and forced separation. In this documentary, we're peeling back the layers of history to explore stories like theirs. Stories of boys brought into the imperial court, not for labor, but for companionship, artistry, and influence. The Ottoman Empire, stretching across Southeast Europe, the Middle East, and in North Africa, reached its peak under sultans like Suleiman the Magnificent, a time of military strength, architectural splendor, and administrative complexity. But beneath the law and structure, there existed an emotional economy, a space governed by attraction, secrecy, and power. Young boys, sometimes as young as 8 or 9, were chosen from across the empire. Many were taken from newly conquered territories and brought to the palace. There, they were trained in music, etiquette, poetry, politics, and how to serve and please. Known as Yamaks, they lived in gender-segregated quarters under strict supervision. According to Venetian diplomat Benedetto Ramberti, as many as 500 youths aged 8 to 20 resided within the palace walls, described as the delight of the Sultan. They could not leave until they were either appointed to public office or until their physical charm faded. They were groomed not just for function, but for admiration. In many cases, high-ranking officials and even sultans kept such companions openly, without shame or scandal. Why? Because the Ottomans didn't classify sexuality the way modern societies do. Desire was defined more by the role one played, dominant or passive, rather than by gender. Still, love was always fragile. For centuries, these relationships existed in quiet balance. Even the janissaries, the elite soldiers of the empire, engaged in such bonds. For some boys, being selected meant escaping poverty, gaining an education, living in comfort. For the men, it meant status, beauty, intimacy. Some Yamaks were even granted tax privileges in exchange for their loyalty. But don't mistake privilege for freedom. Many of them never saw the outside world until they were replaced, forgotten, or released. But all of this would soon begin to vanish. As European influence swept across the Ottoman world, new ideas arrived about morality, shame, and what love should look like. And slowly, this once visible culture began to disappear. In 1858, the Ottoman Penal Code introduced laws punishing public acts against modesty, a vague phrase, but it gave officials the power to police love. Soon after, violence erupted. Men were arrested, beaten, humiliated, their heads shaved in public. Some were even sexually assaulted by authorities, all to send a message. This chapter of history was over. And what of Tahir and Tib? After imprisonment, they were released, but their lovers remained behind bars. In a desperate act of love, the Christian nobleman escaped, reunited with the two young men, and converted to Islam, just to be with them. It was an act of devotion, a final attempt to remain together, but it wasn't enough to stop the tide. By the end of the 19th century, the male beloved had vanished from the palace. Women became the new symbols of courtly favor. One Ottoman writer lamented, "Women lovers have increased, and the beloved boys are gone, as if the people of Lot had vanished from the earth." And just like that, an entire era disappeared. Today, little documentation remains. Most chose to forget. But if you look closely, in old letters, diplomatic reports, and whispered poetry, you'll still find traces. Traces of boys who were adored, elevated, and ultimately erased. Traces of love that wasn't allowed to survive, but somehow found a way to endure. From golden palace chambers to cold prison cells, love doesn't die. It transforms, it hides, and sometimes it escapes.